You are not scrolling through your phone or checking messages tonight. You are standing in the soft glow of lamplight, wrapped in the rustle of silk, with the faint scent of coal smoke drifting in from the street. In your gloved hand, you hold the most powerful object in your entire social universe, not a magic wand, not a royal decree, but a tiny rectangle of stiff white card. Your name engraved in careful, curly letters. This little card decides who you may visit, who may visit you, and whether the neighborhood whispers that you are respectable or ridiculous. You may not survive this level of social pressure. But Victorian you is doing its best. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what you're seeing. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can imagine this scene unfolding all across the world at once. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a polished hallway, your heart thudding faintly beneath your corset, staring at a silver tray already stacked with calling cards. Each one is a name, a rank, a family, a set of expectations. Your own cards rest in a leather case in your hand, still carrying the faint, sharp scent of printer's ink. Getting those cards printed was practically a rite of passage. Proper cardstock, tasteful engraving, no silly pictures, just your full name, never a nickname. This isn't a gamer tag. This is your entire reputation, folded into 12 square centimeters. A maid shows you where to leave your cards. For the household, one for the lady of the house, one for her unmarried daughter, perhaps another for a visiting aunt. You don't hand them over yourself. That would be far too forward. Instead, you place them on the tray like tiny offerings to the gods of gossip and status. Somewhere upstairs, the family will later inspect the cards, deciding who is worth a return visitant, who is destined for the discreet wastebasket in respectable neighborhoods. Calling is serious business. Middle and upper class families keep formal calling hours, usually in the afternoon. Arrive outside those hours unannounced. And you might as well arrive riding a dragon knits. That's strange. But if you come at the right time, with the right card, the maid may lead you into the parlor. If the lady of the house is not at home, you are meant to believe it's due to her schedule, not that she's sitting upstairs in perfect health, happily ignoring your existence. Everyone knows what it means. Nobody says it. Classic. You learn that a simple bend in the corner of your card speaks volumes. A turned-down corner signals you called in person, rather than sending the card by servant. Certain letters, penciled onto the card, carry coded meanings. PPC tells the family you're saying farewell before leaving town, basically a tiny cardboard text that reads, "Bye. It was nice pretending we liked each other one day." You might even dare to send a card to a gentleman's family, bold in this context, meaning your mother supervises every breath you take while it happens. Historically, calling cards spread across Europe and America during the 19th century, especially among those with the means and leisure to maintain such a system. They created a schedule for social life, almost like an analog app that organized visits, friendships, and obligations. Historians still debate whether these rules were followed with religious strictness by most people. Lord treated more as loose Guidelines that only the very anxious and the very rich obsessed over. But for you, inside this story, they feel strict enough to make modern texting etiquette seem positively relaxed back at home. Your family keeps its own card tray in the hall, polished like a shrine. When the maid brings you a new card on a little salver, you feel a tiny thrill. It might mean a new acquaintance, an invitation gathering on the horizon, or a subtle power move. Did that important lady leave her card first as a sign she acknowledges your status? Or did you have to risk calling on her before she recognized you? Call first on someone above you socially, and you risk being ignored. Don't call at all, and you risk being forgotten. It's like climbing a social ladder where every rung is made of paper. Some women begin collecting especially beautiful cards. Printers offer fancy edges, embossed flowers, even delicate birds or cupids. Official etiquette books may sniff that this is a bit too showy, but secretly, everyone loves a pretty design. You might tuck your favorites into an album, right beside pressed flowers and sentimental scraps of ribbon. One day, long after you're gone, a curious stranger flips through that album in an antique shop and wonders who you were seeing your life only through curved, cursive letters and yellowing paste. You tried to impress your neighbors and accidentally impressed a stranger. A century later, not every visit turns into a cozy chat. Sometimes you simply leave your card. The act itself is a statement. I remember you exist, without committing to a long conversation about the weather, your health, or the cousin who married poorly. If you receive someone's card and fail to return the visit within a reasonable time, that silence speaks louder than any insult. You didn't ghost them. You failed to return the call. It sounds gentler, but it stings just as much. The funny part is how tiny, fussy details become signs of moral character. A smudged card, uneven print, or misspelled name invites quiet assumptions about your education, refinement, even your cleanliness. It's just a card. It doesn't reveal whether you're kind, clever, or secretly hilarious. Yet one ink blot, and suddenly you're the heroine of the wrong sort of novel. You begin storing your cards with great care, checking them before each outing as if they're little mirrors reflecting your best self. And so you move through this world of polished door knockers and discreet knocks, where every visit begins and ends with that small, stiff rectangle in your hand. You're not officially allowed to choose your whole life, but you do choose where to place your card, whose tray receives your name, and how boldly you step up to each front door in a universe ruled by politeness. That tiny choice can feel quietly, deliciously powerful. Morning arrives with a kind of stiff, careful light. The first thing you feel isn't the softness of your sheets, but the weight of expectation hanging in the air beside your wardrobe before you even sit up. You know that getting dressed isn't a private chaos of mismatched socks and cozy hoodies. It's a ritual, a performance, a daily obstacle course whose first level involves not fainting while someone yanks your laces. Your maid helps you into your chemise and stockings. And then comes the main event, the corset. It hangs from her hands like some elegant, bony creature, all whalebone or steel stays and neatly stitched fabric. You step into it, lift your arms, and feel the stiff embrace close around your ribs. At first, the laces are loose, almost friendly. you can still breathe easily. Then the tugging begins. The back draws tighter, inch by inch, and suddenly breathing feels less like a right and more like a privilege you have to schedule officially. No proper etiquette book tells you to lace until your waist is impossibly tiny. In polite conversation, everyone pretends moderation is key. You should be graceful, upright, and comfortably constrained. In reality, some women absolutely chase that dramatic hourglass. There are whispered stories of waists measuring 18 inches, the stuff of fashion, myths, and slightly horrified gossip. Historians still argue whether most women actually laced that tightly, or whether those tiny measurements were exaggerated to shock and impress. Either way, once the laces are tied, you stand straighter, shoulders back, ribs lifted like a bird cage. You don't slouch. You can't. The corset shapes more than your body. It shapes your manners. Standing becomes an art. You learn to lower yourself onto a chair rather than flop. You can't bend at the waist without feeling like an accordion on the verge of snapping, so you master a graceful knee bend whenever you need to pick something up. Dropping anything in public becomes risky, which is probably why Victorian objects seem to spend very little time on the actual floor. If you've ever wondered why ladies appear so poised in old photographs, remember, behind that calm face is a spine physically incapable of slumping, and a pair of lungs doing their best in half the usual space. The dress over the corset adds its own challenges: a crisp bodice, layers of petticoats, and then the piece that truly changes how you move through the world, the crinoline. This cage-like structure becomes wildly popular in the mid-19th century, a clever contraption of hoops that holds your skirt in a vast bell shape. Earlier, women had to wear stacks of heavy petticoats to achieve that look, sweating quietly under the weight. The new cage design is lighter, more breathable, and more comfortable, at least in theory. In practice, you now occupy the physical footprint of a small round table. Etiquette follows instantly. You're not just you anymore. You're you plus a metal and fabric force field. Walking through doorways becomes a problem-solving exercise. Narrow hallways require sideways negotiations. Sitting in a crowded church pew means carefully gathering your skirts so you don't knock the hymnal from your neighbor's hands. There's a proper way to sit, easing down so the crinoline tilts just enough, the hoops folding without revealing your ankles. Get the angle wrong, and the whole structure can misbehave, springing up in front like a startled umbrella. Not the sort of surprise anyone wants during a solemn hymn. Crinolines are controversial almost from the moment they appear. Fashionable, yes. Practical, not always. Newspapers gleefully report incidents: skirts catching fire from open grates or candles, gusts of wind revealing far too much leg to horrified passersby. Satirical cartoons show women blown down the street like oversized dandelion seeds. You watch your distance around fireplaces, and your mother reminds you in a pointed tone that no dress is worth becoming a cautionary tale. The rule is simple. You must be decorative, but you must also be careful not to let your decoration catch on anything lethal. Quirky inventions pop up to help you navigate these trials. Little levers and cords to hitch up your skirt when climbing stairs, small hooks to keep layers in place. even discreet devices you can pull to lift the crinoline when walking through puddles. It's like having hidden elevator controls for your dress. Etiquette, of course, insists all such adjustments be invisible. You must float, not fumble. The ideal is effortless grace, even if beneath the fabric your hands are wrestling with secret hardware and your knees are arguing with your balance. Later in the century, the silhouette shifts again. The giant bell shrinks, and the bustle arrives, pushing volume to the back. Your dress now looks nearly normal in front, then explodes into a dramatic shelf behind you. Jokes circulate about balancing teacups on that carefully padded horizon. Fashion plates depict women with what looks like a small sofa strapped to their backs. Once again, etiquette steps in. You mustn't sit too abruptly and crush the structure. You must navigate crowded rooms without sweeping light objects off tables with your passing train. You become constantly aware of the space behind. You'll like a car that's just learned it has a trailer. All this shaping has health consequences, of course, and people in your time know it. Even if they don't always admit it, doctors warn about tight lacing, compressed organs, weak muscles, fainting spells. At the same time, some argue a well-made corset offers support and encourages good posture. Historians still debate whether everyday corset were dramatically harmed most women's health or whether the worst injuries were rare extremes that became juicy anecdotes. Inside your own skin, you mainly notice that big meals and deep breaths are suspiciously hard work. Despite the discomfort, you're not simply a helpless victim of your wardrobe. You choose your fabrics, colors, and trimmings. You experiment with slightly looser lacing when no elder relative is watching. You trade whispers with friends about which dressmaker cuts a bodice that looks fashionable but lets you breathe enough to survive a dance without seeing stars. Maybe you even laugh when a strict aunt insists your corset must be tighter, while clearly fighting her own battle with her stays. The whole room is gasping for oxygen in the name of elegance, and no one dares admit it. Walking outside becomes a moving etiquette lesson. You mustn't swing your skirts to energetically risking a glimpse of ankle. You mustn't walk too quickly, or your crinoline may sway in a way that suggests far more than you intend. But you also mustn't shuffle like a ghost. The correct pace is smooth, moderate, unhurried. Your spine stays tall, your chin level, your shoulders relaxed but never slouched, somewhere between the corset, the hoops, and your own determination. You develop a stride that is part gliding, part tightrope walking, and part very controlled wobble. You end the day with red marks where the corset pressed, a faint ache in your lower back, and the quiet satisfaction of having navigated another full social calendar without tipping over, catching fire, or revealing forbidden socks in your world. That counts as a flawless performance. The lamps in the drawing room glow softly, and somewhere a piano sighs out the opening notes of a waltz. You stand at the edge of the room, gloved fingers smoothing an imaginary wrinkle in your skirt, pretending not to notice anyone, while secretly noticing absolutely everyone tonight. You're not just a polite young woman, you're a stealth communication device with lace trim. Officially, romance isn't your job. You're meant to be modest, quiet, and slightly invisible until spoken to, unofficially. Your entire social world lives for moments like this. a glance across the room, a tiny flutter of the fan, a glove removed at the exact right speed. You know the rules that say you must never chase, but you also know the tricks that help someone nice notice you, without anyone being able to prove you wanted that to happen. In one hand, you hold your fan bone, or ivory, silk, or paper, painted with flowers, ruins, or perhaps a tragic shepherd who looks like he regrets everything. You open it with a practiced flick, much harder than it looks when your palms are slightly damp with nerves, according to little etiquette books and whispered gossip. The way you hold that fan can say things like, "Follow me, we're being watched," or "You may speak to me now." Is everyone in the room truly fluent in fan language? Probably not. But the idea that you might be sends a lovely shiver of drama through the air. Fans, dance cards, gloves, and handkerchiefs become essential props in high society, not just practical accessories, but social tools. You use your fan to cool your face, but also to hide a smile. Gloves protect your skin, but also control how much contact you allow. Even your handkerchief becomes more than fabric when it conveniently slips from your fingers within reach of a particular pair of boots. Victorians adore symbolism. If they can turn an object into a tiny theater, they absolutely will. You stand near a potted palm, pretending to be fascinated by its leaves, as an eligible gentleman glances your way. Your chaperone sits nearby, apparently absorbed in conversation, but absolutely tracking your every move. You can't stride across the room and introduce yourself, but you can angle your body just so, tilt your head, and look away the moment his eyes meet yours. The trick is to seem interested but not hungry, present but not desperate, warm but not improper. It's like calibrating a very delicate oven using only your eyebrows. Your fan becomes your accomplice. Closed and held in your right hand, it makes you look self-possessed and reserved. Open and moved slowly, it suggests calm interest. A rapid flutter might mean you're overheated or nervous, or trying to say, "Please rescue me from this boring conversation before I dissolve into dust." Old manuals print entire secret codes for fan signals, precise meanings for every angle and motion. Historians still argue whether anyone actually memorized them, or whether those elaborate systems were later romantic fantasies built on simpler gestures. Inside the story, you enjoy imagining your fan is smarter than your chaperone. Your gloves carry their own rules. Indoors, you keep them on while visiting except when eating. You don't shake hands bare-skinned in formal settings unless it's close family. That thin layer of kid leather between you and everyone else is a barrier and a shield. But it also becomes deliciously significant when you remove it to slowly peel off a glove. Finger by finger is technically just practical. Conveniently, it also reveals your wrista flash of skin that counts as spicy in this context. You move carefully, aware that speed and smoothness matter. Too brisk looks clumsy. Too slow looks like flirting, so direct that even the potted palm would raise an eyebrow. There's a quirky little belief, whispered among fashion-minded girls. Dropping a glove at the right moment summons attention like a spell. You accidentally let it fall as you cross the room. If a gentleman rushes to retrieve it, you gain a polite excuse to acknowledge him. You thank him with a slight curtsy, a smile that fades quickly and perhaps a fleeting look into his eyes before turning away. Your chaperone can't object to thanking someone who did you a small courtesy, though she may notice you drop things more often near certain people than others. You try not to push your luck. Then there's the handkerchief, the classic tool of literature and gossip. Yours is edged in neat embroidery, maybe with a tiny initial stitched in one corner. You keep it tucked in your sleeve or reticule, ready for sniffles, imagined or real. A well-timed drop of this delicate square on a clean floor is a conversation starter. A gentleman who picks it up may hold it a second longer than necessary, his thumb brushing the fine fabric while your heart attempts a quiet tap dance. You thank him, accept the handkerchief, and let your fingers just barely graze his sleeve. That millisecond of contact feels louder than the entire orchestra. Dancing gives you even more material. At a respectable ball, you carry a small card tied to your wrist, your dance card, with printed names of dances and blank lines for partners. A gentleman asks for the third waltz, the fifth quadrille, the final polka. You manage this like a social spreadsheet. Say yes too often to one person, and it looks suspicious. Decline to many others, and you might offend families you'd rather not have as enemies. Sometimes you claim a spot is taken when it's not, mentally reserving it for someone who hasn't arrived yet. It's strategic booking in satin slippers. Eye contact is its own curriculum. You're expected to keep your gaze modest, lowered slightly, with only brief upward glances. Staring is bold. Looking away too quickly seems shy to the point of awkwardness. You aim for a warm flicker of contact, followed by a gentle retreat. In a world without texting, those few seconds of shared glance often carry the weight of entire paragraphs of unsent messages. You learn to read the difference between an accidental look and a deliberate 1-second glance. A half smile, a tightening of the jaw. Each detail adds to the invisible script between you and whoever stands across the room. Some moralists grumble about all this silent flirting. They warn that fans and glances lead young people into trouble, that the best defense is fewer dances and stricter supervision. Others roll their eyes, quietly enjoying the thrill of a society that claims to be reserved while inventing elaborate ways to say "I like you" without moving its lips. You exist in the middle, using the small freedoms available, turning your body language and accessories into a secret game board. At the end of the evening, you climb into your carriage with flushed cheeks and tingling fingers from polite hand touches during dances. You've obeyed every official rule. You've never stood alone in a dark corner, never spoken too loudly, never admitted to any romantic feeling. Yet you carry home a folded dance card with certain initials circled in your thoughts, a fan that remembers who you pointed it toward, and a glove that still feels the ghost of a warm hand. For someone not allowed many visible risks, you've just spent an entire night quietly gambling with looks, lace, and very small movements. The next few weeks feel a bit like living inside a very pretty minimum security prison. You're dressed, polished, and perfectly polite, but you almost never move through the world on your own. If you want to go out, one question hangs over every doorway, every outing, every breath of fresh air. Who is coming with you to watch? You sit in the morning room, hands folded, as your mother reviews the day like a general planning a campaign. A short walk in the park is allowed, but only with her or another trusted adult woman. A visit to a friend is fine, but the carriage must collect you at a respectable hour. And an older relative should be present in the house. Calling on a gentleman alone isn't even discussed. That idea lives in the same category as dragons or sensible pockets in dresses in respectable society. It's widely accepted that an unmarried woman does not appear in public with an unrelated man unless a chaperone, safely unromantic older woman is present. That's the mainstream fact of your life. No tea shop outings for just the two of you. No shared walks at twilight. If you're seen in an unchaperoned situation, the story writes itself in the minds of everyone watching, and that story is not kind. It usually ends with hurried gossip, a damaged reputation, and tense family talks about whether a wedding must now be arranged. Your chaperone is usually your mother, your aunt, or an older family friend with a spine like an iron poker and a gaze that could freeze a pot of soup. She doesn't need to say much. Her presence alone declares, everything happening here is respectable. When you sit in a drawing room with a gentleman, she quietly occupies a nearby chair with her embroidery, her book, or her careful listening. She is the human equivalent of a security light. Nothing improper is meant to happen under that glow. Sometimes, though, things get creative. There's a quirky little practice some families adopt when no suitable older woman is available. A younger brother is pressed into service as a miniature chaperone, trotting along on walks or sitting grumpily in the corner during visits. Technically a male relative, and therefore counts as protection even if he spends half the time thinking about cricket or sweets. You try to bribe him with extra dessert to look the other way when your conversation with a certain someone becomes slightly more animated than your mother might prefer. He pretends not to notice. He notices everything. Curfew is another invisible chain. Evening events are carefully timed. You can attend a ball or concert, but you must return at a respectable hour. That hour depends on your family and social circle, but it always exists. Staying too late hints at recklessness. Arriving home at dawn suggests complete catastrophe when the carriage clock nudges past the family limit. You feel the tension rise along with the lamplight. Can't even imagine the scandal of being seen on the street at a time usually reserved for delivery carts and people who make poor decisions. Official etiquette books talk endlessly about propriety and safety. They say chaperones protect a young woman from unwanted attention, dangerous men, and poor choices she might regret forever. Some writers insist a respectable girl should be grateful that all this supervision exists to preserve her happiness and future. Still argue whether these rules reflected most families' daily behavior or whether many households bent them quietly. When nobody important was looking, it's hard to measure how strictly the average girl on an average street was watched. But inside this story, your leash feels quite short. You notice how architecture cooperates with supervision. Drawing rooms are arranged so visitors sit in plain sight. Corridors in better houses stay busy with servants and family members. Doors are often left ajar. During gentlemen callers, privacy is treated with suspicion, and so you move through your days constrained and constantly observed. carrying your calling cards, your corset, and your quiet, unspoken hopes like hidden treasures. A closed door might be perfectly innocent, yet it invites speculation. You learn to hold entire conversations while being fully aware of the old ant in the corner who appears fast asleep, but absolutely is not. Even the garden, which looks wild and free in paintings, has its own quiet rules. You may walk with a gentleman beneath the trees, but only if the path remains visible from the house. You do not vanish into rose-covered side alleys. If the shrubbery is so thick that people at the windows can't see you, it's also thick enough for rumors to take root and bloom. You smile as you stroll, speaking of the weather, books, or the orchestra at last week's dance, feeling the eyes from the terrace like a warm, steady weight between your shoulder blades. Travel demands even more planning. A respectable, unmarried woman rarely journeys alone, unless the trip is very short and the route utterly safe. Long train or coach rides should include a companion, preferably older and impeccably respectable. Tickets, luggage, and compartments become more complicated because you must manage not only your own comfort, but also your chaperone's convenience. A trip that sounds thrilling in theory often turns into a careful negotiation. Who sits where? Who is allowed to speak to whom? You don't simply buy a ticket and go. You ask, you wait, you plan. There are small loopholes, of course. Shopping along familiar streets can sometimes be done with only a maid for company. That still counts as supervised, though gossip may sniff that servants are easier to outmaneuver than mothers. A quiet visit to a close female friend might escape intense oversight provided the families are trusted allies. Even then, you know that news of your whereabouts flows along invisible channels. A coachman mentions your destination to a footman, who tells a housekeeper, who mentions it to a cousin Anne soon. An aunt 3 counties away knows you went out in a blue dress at 3 o'clock. Rumors about what happens when supervision fails are everywhere. Magazines and moral tales spin stories of girls who meet the wrong man in a moment of freedom, accept a forbidden carriage ride, or elope on impulse. These tales rarely end well. They function as caution signs written in tear stains. You read them in your room and feel a tangle of fear, frustration, and skeptical amusement. The message is clear. Good girls stay visible. Bad outcomes lurk just beyond the edge of the lamplight. Not everyone agrees with this strictness, Evan, in your own time. Some thinkers argue that women should be trusted more, that intelligence and education matter more than constant watchfulness. Others insist that in a world where a single rumor can shatter a reputation, supervision is the only armor you have. Caught between these voices, you try to navigate your own instincts. You know you're not foolish, but you also know that one wrong sighting in the wrong place at the wrong time could undo years of careful behavior, so you learn to bargain quietly. If you accept your mother's presence at one event without complaint, she might allow a slightly freer arrangement next time. If you charm an older lady at a party, she may become a kindly chaperone, more inclined to look away during harmless moments. If you behave flawlessly for weeks, your father might approve a small outing that brushes the edge of independence, a music lesson across town, with only a respectable female teacher waiting at the door at night. In your bedroom, with the door firmly closed, you finally stand alone in the silence. For a few blessed minutes, no one is watching. Your thoughts move more freely than your body ever does. You imagine stepping into the street alone, choosing your own path without anyone counting the minutes until your return. You know that tomorrow the system of supervision will snap back into place. But for now, you breathe deeply, sink into your pillow, and let your mind walk wherever it pleases, send watch, and gloriously free in the dark. The clock creeps toward 4 in the afternoon, that magical slice of the day when hunger and politeness shake hands. You arrive at the townhouse door, knowing this is not merely a snack. It is an exam you never signed up for. Porcelain and pastry are your test papers. The maid takes your wrap, smooths a few invisible creases from your sleeve, and leads you toward the tea table, where reputations quietly rise and fall beside the sugar bowl. The room looks harmless enough. A low table waits near the sofa, draped in a pale cloth. On it sits an army of delicate cups, a teapot so fragile it might shatter if you glanced at it too sternly, matching saucers, sugar tongs, a milk jug, and a cake stand layered with food clearly not meant to satisfy a normal human appetite. Chairs are arranged so the hostess has a clear view of everyone. You're invited to sit, but not just anywhere. The best place is the one she gestures toward, and you lower yourself carefully, as though taking a seat before a judge. Afternoon tea becomes a genuine institution in your century. Fashionable people adore the idea of a light meal between lunch and late dinner, especially in cities where days stretch long and social calls pile up. A famous duchess is often credited with popularizing the habit of serving tea and small bites in the late afternoon, and society seizes the idea with both gloved hands. Soon, respectable households structure their afternoons around this ritual, inviting friends to gather over tea that is never just about the tea. Historians still debate whether these elegant gatherings are truly about food, caffeine, or simply a very polite way to inspect each other's morals and wardrobes. As a guest, you do not touch the teapot unless explicitly asked. That is the hostess's domain. She sits or stands near it like a captain at the helm, pouring for each person in turn. When your turn comes, she asks if you take sugar and milk, and you answer clearly but softly. You do not change your mind halfway through. The cup arrives on its saucer, handle turned toward you. You thank her because even something as simple as hot water with leaves comes wrapped in the language of gratitude. Now you face one of the tiniest, strangest social minefields of your day. Milk first or tea first? Some insist true refinement means pouring tea first, then adding milks so you can judge the strength and color. Others claim milk first protects fine china from the shock of boiling liquid. Class stories swirl around it. Some say poorer households pour milk first because their cups are thicker and sturdier. Wealthier ones prefer tea first. Still argue whether this sequence truly maps onto class or whether later writers turned a simple beverage choice into a miniature culture war. You quietly do whatever your own family does and try not to look like you're fighting ideological battles every time you lift the milk jug. Holding the cup is another test. You slide your thumb and index finger through the handle or pinch it gently, letting the cup rest partly on your middle finger. You do not clutch it like a life raft. Your wrist stays relaxed, your elbow close to your body, your movements small and controlled. The famous image of sticking out your pinky dramatically lives mostly in caricatures and stage comedies. In real life, it risks making you look like you're signaling passing ships. Better to keep your fingers tidy and calm. Stirring is a performance in miniature. You place your spoon in the cup and move it quietly, usually in a gentle back and forth or soft circle, making sure it doesn't clink loudly against the porcelain. Noise suggests haste or careless hands. You never leave the spoon standing upright like a lonely flagpole. When you're done, you might tap it once lightly on the rim, then lay it neatly on the saucer. In some households, there's even a quirky belief that 2 vigorous stirs hint at a restless or sloppy character. Apparently, your entire personality is being judged by how you handle sweetened water. The food looks enchanting on its tiered stand. One level holds dainty sandwiches, crusts removed, cut into neat rectangles, or triangles filled with cucumber, egg, cress, or perhaps thin slices of cold meat or fish if the hostess is feeling generous. Another level offers scones or buns, waiting for jam and thick cream. On top, small cakes and pastries are decorated with icing so delicate it seems almost cruel to eat them. You're meant to take modest portions, 1 or 2 little items at a time, not stack your plate as though this is your only meal of the week. The rule is simple. You may be hungry, but you must pretend you are not. Eating here has its own code. You don't grab a sandwich and cram half of it into your mouth at once. You take small bites, chew quietly, and never speak with your cheeks full. For scones, you break off a small piece with your fingers, then add jam and cream to that piece, not the whole thing at once. It's fiddly and slightly absurd, but it keeps you from dropping sticky blobs into your lap. Cakes that crumble too easily are handled with a fork. If something threatens to disintegrate, you simply leave it looking sadly decorative. Casualties are accepted as long as they die silently. Conversation flows lightly around at least pretends to. Politics are usually avoided in mixed company. Strong disagreements are considered unsuited to an occasion built around fragile porcelain. Instead, people talk about mutual acquaintances, books, concerts, recent sermons, charitable events, the weather, and, of course, who wore what at the most recent ball. You participate carefully, never sounding too opinionated. A sharp remark might be admired in private, but in the moment, it echoes around the table like a dropped fork. You aim for clever but not cutting, amusing but not loud. Think polished radio broadcast, not chaotic group chat. Gossip, of course, thrives here. The tea table is one of its favorite habitats. A raised eyebrow, a vaguely worded story, wrapped in phrases like "I don't wish to speak ill," but one hears that. You learn to decode which remarks are warnings, which are quiet invitations into a social circle, and which are traps. The person who shares every scandal they know will likely repeat every word you say. The real art is to listen more than you speak, laugh in the right places, and reveal very little about your own life while sounding completely engaged. Not every household follows the same level of fussiness. In some homes, the rules are looser, the cake slices larger, the laughter louder. In others, you feel as though a silent committee is scoring everything, from how you hold your napkin to where you rest your gaze between sips. Etiquette manuals try to freeze this ritual into one correct pattern. But in practice, customs vary by class, region, and temperament. Historians still debate whether most families truly followed those rigid printed rules, or relied more on local habit and common sense. You, sitting with your cup and your carefully managed crumbs, simply do your best not to become the story everyone whispers about once you leave. When the visit ends, you place your cup neatly back on the saucer. Check that no crumbs cling traitorously to your bodice, and thank your hostess with sincere warmth. You have survived the silent audition of tea etiquette without spilling, slurping, or stabbing the cake stand as you step out into the cooler street air, stomach only slightly fuller, but mind buzzing. You know that somewhere behind that quiet front door, your every movement over the last hour is already being replayed, analyzed, and perhaps admired with the same care as the decoration on a perfect little tart. The street outside smells of dust, horse sweat, and the faint sweetness of someone baking bread nearby. You step through the front door, your gloved hand resting for a moment on the railing, and you feel it at once. The open air isn't really open. It's a stage, and everyone you pass is a potential reviewer, ready with silent judgments about your stride, your posture, your expression, and where you choose to place your feet. You begin with the simple act of walking along your own street. That sounds harmless, almost mundane. In your world, it is anything but casual. A respectable woman may walk. Yes, but there are rules about which streets, what time of day, and with whom. Certain avenues are known for promenading. During fashionable hours, ladies and gentlemen stroll there, seeing and being seen. Other streets filled with rough trade, taverns, and lodging houses are not for you. If you're spotted wandering there, people will wonder what business you have that respectable folk don't. The city is a map, and half of it might as well be marked with invisible skull and crossbones for someone of your standing. Your clothing already announces who you are from a distance. Your dress is neat, your bonnet modest but well made, your gloves clean. You carry a parasol not for drama, though it certainly looks dramatic, but to protect your skin. Pale complexions are prized in your circles, as proof you don't labor outdoors. As you walk, you hold the parasol at a careful angle, shielding your face without blocking your view. Pointing it like a weapon at passersby is not considered elegant, even if some of them deserve it. A mainstream truth of city life in the 19th century is that public spaces are sharply divided by class and gender expectations. Certain parks and promenades become known as safe, respectable zones where women can appear without inviting suspicion. Others are dominated by men who work, drink, or loiter, and a lone woman would stand out immediately. Police, moral reformers, and social commentators all fret over how women move through streets, especially at night. Respectability isn't just about what you do. It's about where you're seen doing it. Your pace must hit a very specific sweet spot. Too slow, and you seem idle, perhaps even hopeful for attention. Too fast, and you appear flustered, as though fleeing something or worse. Running late in a life that's supposed to look perfectly arranged. You aim for a smooth, moderate stride, the kind that lets your skirt swish gently without flaring. Your boots click softly on the pavement. You never stomp. You never rush if you must hurry to catch a carriage. You try to make it look like an elegant glide, not a sprint. Your gaze is another minefield. Etiquette guides suggest a proper woman keeps her eyes modestly downcast or focused ahead, never letting her stare wander too boldly. Locking eyes with strange men in the street sends the wrong message. According to those stern little books, you learn to glance without appearing to look. You notice shop windows, lamp posts, street vendors, but your face remains composed, your attention apparently anchored to your own thoughts. If someone whistles or calls out, you ignore it entirely. Responding even to scold would admit you heard them, placing you on the same conversational level as whoever shouted. Your silence becomes your shield, even if inside you're composing very sharp replies. The people who accompany you matter as much as your route. Walking alone even by day can feel risky. A maid at your side helps, though some onlookers still see a servant as a flimsy barrier. Walking with your mother, aunt, or an older female relative signals you're under guidance, which reads as respectable. If a gentleman joins your walk, the situation grows complicated. With a chaperone present, it may be acceptable in certain places. Without one, two figures strolling side by side can set the local rumor mill spinning like a top. Quirky customs grow around public spaces. In certain cities, famous parks host slow, circular promenades at set hours. Each loop an opportunity to show off new fashions, potential suitors, or freshly acquired hats. You might circle a lake or follow a gravel path again and again. You're there for the air, while mostly scanning for familiar faces. There are even unspoken codes about which side of the path you choose. The center is often reserved for the most fashionable walkers. Straying too far to the edges can look like retreating, lest you're avoiding mud or runaway children. Street harassment is not a modern invention, though your era rarely names it as such. You sometimes hear of girls who are followed, addressed too boldly, or stared at in ways that make their skin crawl. Official advice says to stay calm, avoid side streets, and report serious trouble to a nearby policeman or male relative. At the same time, some moralists blame the victims, claiming harassed women must have been in the wrong place or wearing something to account. Historians still argue whether the average woman felt mostly safe during daylight walks or whether danger and discomfort were constant, unspoken companions. Small gestures become armor. You keep your posture upright, shoulders back, head level. You avoid fidgeting with your clothing, which might draw unwanted attention. You don't eat while walking. Street snacking looks sloppy in polite circles. If you must carry packages, you hold them neatly, not piled precariously to your chin like a walking tower of boxers. The goal is to appear self-possessed at all times, even if your shoes pinch and your stomach growls. There's also the question of how far from home you may walk. In many respectable families, the answer is not very. The immediate neighborhood is acceptable. Venturing to distant parts of the city alone is discouraged. If you need to travel farther, you're meant to hire a cab, take a carriage, or arrange an escort. Some women quietly push the boundaries, slipping into less familiar streets when They know no one is watching, discovering that the city is both larger and more alive than the narrow paths approved for them. It feels like sneaking bites from a feast you're officially only allowed to smell. Country walks follow a slightly different script. If you live in a rural area, fields, lanes, and village roads replace city pavements. You still avoid wandering alone through isolated woods or rarely used paths, partly for safety, partly for fear of what people will say if you meet someone unseen. You lift your skirts clear of mud as best you can, pick your way around puddles, and hope your boots don't betray you by sinking too deep. Farm workers, laborers, and rougher characters share these spaces with you, their lives vastly different from yours, yet intersecting on the same worn track through a field. Every now and then, you catch yourself wishing you could simply stride, lift your skirts a little, lengthen your step, look around with honest curiosity filtered by layers of etiquette and self-control. The rules shape how you move, where you look, how you breathe, even in the open air. They claim to keep you safe, to preserve your reputation, to ensure every passerby sees a model of propriety. But underneath that careful walk, there's a small pulse of rebellion. You feel it most keenly in the moment your boot meets the road. Brief instant when you're balanced on your own strength, moving yourself forward even within invisible lines. The door to the dining room opens, and you immediately feel taller and smaller at the same time. Taller because your spine lengthens automatically at the sight of polished silver. Smaller because the room is essentially one giant test in not embarrassing yourself with soup. Candlelight glows on glass and porcelain. Servants glide like quiet ghosts. The table looks like a battlefield where armies of forks stand in unnerving formation. You pause just inside the doorway because the first rule is simple: you do not seat yourself. Place cards wait by each plate, tiny tents announcing who belongs where. These cards do more than prevent chaos. They advertise the social order. The most important guests sit near the host or hostess. Minor guests drift toward the edges, placed not by accident but by design. Every chair tells a story about who matters, who is tolerated, and who is merely filling space. You find your name, take your seat with calm grace, and prepare for the next act in a life where even silence speaks volumes. You look for your name, your heart beating just a little faster as you realize your exact seat says something about how this household ranks you. Not that anyone would ever admit to ranking people, of course not. But somehow, the most favored guests always end up nearer the expensive flowers. You find your place and approach the chair. A servant pulls it out for you, and you sit carefully, smoothing your skirts so they don't puff up in unflattering directions. Your napkin waits either on your plate or beside it, folded with crisp precision. You do not snap it open like a flag. You unfold it quietly and place it on your lap, never above your waist. This small square of linen becomes your crumb catcher, your shield against gravy, and your silent signal to the staff. When you leave the table at the end of the meal, placing the napkin neatly on your chair or to the left of your plate tells them you're finished. You finally look down at the cutlery. There is a lot of it, a small army of forks on one side, knives and spoons on the other end, sometimes a curious little extra piece laid across the top, silently daring you to guess its purpose. The basic rule is mercifully simple. Work from the outside in. Each course peels away one layer of metallic anxiety. If fish arrives first, you use the outermost fork and knife, often shaped differently for the task. If soup comes, you take the outermost spoon, usually rounder and shallower. The utensils are arranged in the precise order you'll need them, like a quietly helpful roadmap that somehow still manages to look like a threat. A widely accepted truth of your era is that formal dinners in the 19th century follow a carefully choreographed pattern, often 10 or more courses. In grand households, you might begin with soup, move through fish, entrees, roast, sweets, and finally dessert, all timed with conversation, wine, and unspoken social choreography. Middle-class families imitate this structure with fewer courses, but similar formality. Etiquette manuals spell out the sequence in detail, telling you exactly which foods are eaten with which implements, turning your plate into a small stage where nothing should ever look clumsy or improvised. Soup arrives first tonight, steaming gently in its shallow bowl. You resist the urge to blow on it, strictly forbidden in polite society. Instead, you stir it softly to let the steam disperse, then sip from the side of the spoon, tilting it away from yourself. If the soup is served in a plate rather than a bowl, you scoop outward, never toward your body, to avoid spills. It feels like trying to drink a hot lake in public while pretending you're perfectly at ease. Conversation begins once everyone is seated and served. You speak mainly to the people on either side of you, turning first to one, then the other as courses change. The host or hostess sets the tone. Light topics dominate: art, music, recent travels, mild anecdotes. Money, illness, and strong political opinions are carefully avoided at respectable tables. You offer a few gentle jokes, nothing sharp enough to draw metaphorical blood. The goal is to keep the atmosphere bright, not to win a debate. Your voice stays low enough that your neighbor hears clearly, but the whole table does not. This isn't a performance for the gallery, even if it sometimes feels that way. Servants move behind you, refilling glasses, removing plates, bringing in new dishes. You're not meant to acknowledge them too openly. You don't turn around to chat. You treat their presence as part of the evening's invisible machinery, acknowledging with a quiet thank you or a small nod when a plate is set before you. In some households, there's a quirky little signal. A slight lift of your hand tells the footman you don't want more wine, leaving your glass untouched and full hints you've reached your limit. The glass becomes a tiny dial for how much you want to remember tomorrow. The arrival of fish can bring quiet drama if someone forgets the rules. Many etiquette writers insist you must never cut fish with a steel knife. Fit might impart a metallic taste. Instead, special fish knives, or even just a fork and a piece of bread, are recommended for separating delicate flakes. This leads to an odd sight: guests carefully teasing their fish apart without scraping or sawing. Historians still debate whether most households truly used specialized fish cutlery or whether many families cheerfully made do with whatever they had. While guidebooks pretended everyone owned 6 sizes of fish knives, you quickly learn that bones, pits, and shells must be handled with care. Small bones are removed discreetly and placed at the edge of your plate, not spat into your hand in horror. Olive pits, cherry stones, and similar hazards are moved from mouth to fork to plate in one smooth motion, if possible. Your aim is never to show anyone the contents of your mouth. The few seconds when a stray bone announces itself feel like a miniature crisis. Success is when no one notices you've performed this small rescue. Even bread and butter have rules. You never bite directly into a whole roll or slice. You break off a small piece, butter it individually, and then eat it. Your butter knife rests on the butter plate, not stabbed into the pat like a flag of conquest. In elegant circles, people notice how you manage even these trivial acts. Neatness suggests discipline and refinement. Smearing butter across the tablecloth with a stray crumb could haunt your reputation for years. In certain families, the main course usually features roast meat, vegetables, and rich sauces. You cut manageable pieces, never sawing back and forth in a way that rattles the china. You don't chase every last pea across your plate like it's prey. Leaving a small amount of food behind is acceptable, graceful, even as long as you don't waste excessively. Eating too quickly suggests greed. Eating too slowly holds up the entire sequence. You find a rhythm between hunger and decorum, fork moving steadily, conversation flowing. Eyes politely avoiding the chaos when someone at the far end drops a fork. Dessert arrives, and the table transforms again. Sometimes the main cloth is removed to reveal a felt undercloth or polished wood. Fruit, nuts, and sweet confections appear in stages. You may find a special dessert fork and spoon waiting above your plate, ready to be drawn down for this final act. Grapes are eaten one by one, not in handfuls. Citrus might require a small knife. For nuts, there are tiny crackers and picks. It's like finishing the evening with a miniature picnic that has studied etiquette. When the meal finally winds down, you place your cutlery in the resting position that signals completion, usually side by side on the plate. Handles aligned. You do not clap, yawn, or stretch. You wait for the host or hostess to offer a subtle cue. Guests may then rise and move to another room for coffee and quieter conversation. As you stand, you realize you've survived an entire formal dinner without launching a fork, spilling a drink, or attacking the fish with the wrong knife. For a place setting that looked like a puzzle, you've solved it with quiet, controlled grace, one careful bite at a time. The house is quiet enough to hear the clock in the hall ticking off every second you've spent delaying a reply. Your writing desk waits by the window. Small drawers stuffed with paper, envelopes, sealing wax, and secrets thinly disguised as stationery. You sit, smooth your skirt, and pull out a clean sheet. It looks innocent. It is not. It is a trap that demands you be touching and witty, but never too honest, in neat ink that never blots. No pressure at all. You start by checking the paper itself. It matters. Good quality sheets with a subtle watermark say your family is comfortably off. They whisper that you have tastes, that your thoughts arrive dressed properly. There are fashion trends in paper, just as in bonnets: cream, pale blue, or soft grace, sometimes delicately embossed, sometimes edged with a simple border. Plain is safest. Anything too bright risks looking childish or theatrical, like you bought your writing supplies from a toy shop instead of a proper stationer. Next comes the pen. A steel nib, newly dipped, glints over the inkwell. You know from bitter experience that cheap ink betrays you at the worst moments. bleeding across the page like a tiny disaster. So you take a breath and begin with the safest opening, my dear, followed by the name that fits your correspondent. Etiquette guides stress that this greeting must be chosen with care. My dearest is for very close family or someone you are almost certainly going to marry. Dear Miss So-and-so sounds polite and formal. To whom it may concern is for business, not breakfast. Gossip. A widely understood truth of your time is that letter writing is one of the primary ways people stay connected over distance. There is no texting, no email, no instant call that reaches across counties. But in many places, the postal system is remarkably efficient, especially in cities, where multiple deliveries happen each day. You can write in the morning and sometimes receive a reply by evening. That speed turns letters into something close to a slow-motion conversation. And it means your words travel far more than your body ever will. You choose your sentences the way you choose your dresses. Attractive but modest, expressive but controlled. You do not gush uncontrollably, especially not on paper that can be intercepted, reread, or accidentally dropped where unfriendly eyes might find it. Emotions are folded neatly between comments about the weather, your health, and recent visits. I was much pleased to receive your kind letter. Might actually mean I have thought of you every hour and nearly tackled the postman when he passed our gate. You train yourself to hide intensity behind phrases that look calmly respectable. Every now and then, your feelings slip out sideways through a slightly longer sentence, an extra adjective, a question that invites a more personal reply. Countless books claim to teach the art of letter writing, printing full example letters for every scenario, consoling a friend, thanking an aunt, refusing an unsuitable proposal, even responding to an advertisement for a governess or companion. Historians still debate whether most people truly copied those printed models or simply borrowed their tone, filled in their own truths for you. The manuals are both comfort and threat. They show you what's right and remind you how easily you might go wrong. You keep one eye on neatness. Your handwriting is judged almost as much as your words. Loopy, uncontrolled script hints at an emotional or messy nature. Tiny, cramped letters suggest nervousness or stinginess. Clear, graceful lines say you are educated and self-possessed. A single ink blot can feel like a tiny moral failure. There's even a quirky superstition in some circles that blotted letters bring bad luck in love, so you press your blotting paper gently, hoping only a faint shadow remains. Of course, if you have a cat, it may decide your drying letter is the perfect napping spot. Leaving etiquette with no advice except don't scream. Space costs money. Postage is priced by weight, and paper is not free. So you learn to use the page like a puzzle. You fill the front, then the back, leaving margins just wide enough to look deliberate in thrifty or enthusiastic moods. You might cross your letter writing one set of lines, then turning the page 90 degrees and writing another set over the top. To modern eyes, it looks like chaos. To you, it's efficiency. People truly do train themselves to read this crisscross pattern without getting headaches. Somewhere, your future self is probably jealous of your ability to decode this mess while half-asleep. Every sentence must pass the invisible sensors in your mind. You ask yourself, could my mother read this without gasping? Would my aunt purse her lips? Might a future spouse misunderstand this if the letter surfaces in a trunk years from now? You express sympathy without sentimentality, admiration without romance, irritation without spite. It's emotional gymnastics performed in ink on paper. You tuck humor into safe pocket self-deprecating jokes about your clumsiness, never mocking serious subjects or making cutting remarks that could circulate. Sometimes your letters aren't truly private and you know it. Younger girls often have their correspondence read by parents or guardians, especially when it involves male acquaintances. You might be told to show an incoming letter to your mother, or let her review your reply before sealing it. She says it's to protect you. You suspect it's also to keep the storyline tightly controlled. The result: even your most heartfelt letters carry invisible footnotes. What will mother think of this sentence? There are ways around that supervision, of course, delicate and risky. Like everything else, one person might tuck a second, smaller note inside the envelope meant only for you. Another might use phrases that sound harmless to outsiders, but carry secret meaning between you. I trust your health has improved since last we met at church really means I haven't stopped replaying our brief conversation by the hymn books. The safest secrets are the ones only you know you wrote. The physical finish of the letter is another small ceremony. You fold the sheet in careful thirds or quarters, slip it into an envelope, and address the front in a hand that's legible but not flamboyant. Titles and names must be precise: Miss, Mrs., Mr., with or without initials. Getting someone's status wrong is a tiny social crime. Then comes the sealing. Wax dripped onto the flap and stamped with a seal. That glossy blob is a padlock for paper. If it arrives broken, someone has clearly peeked. You feel oddly powerful when you press your family crest or a simple monogram into the warm waxes, though you've just signed a compact with the universe. Sometimes you sent the letter lightly by keeping the paper in a drawer with lavender or rose petals. Too much perfume looks desperate or theatrical. Just enough feels like a whisper when the recipient opens it. There are even stories of people recognizing a letter's sender by fragrance, alone before seeing the handwriting. Whether that's romantic nonsense or real, you still hesitate with the perfume bottle, unwilling to announce your feelings in a cloud of roses. At last, you hand the finished envelope to a servant to post or slip it into a public box yourself, if circumstances allow. As the letter leaves your hand, you feel a strange hollowness. Your thoughts, your careful half-truths, your tiny rebellions all sail away in the pocket of an unknown stranger. You picture its journey along dusty roads, into sorting offices, onto carts, into mailbags, until it finally lands in someone else's palm. Then the waiting begins. You scan the morning delivery, pretend not to care. Tell yourself you're entirely indifferent, casually linger wherever the post usually arrives. When a reply finally comes, you recognize the handwriting instantly. Your heart does something embarrassing in your chest. You retreat to a reasonably private corner and slit the envelope open, ready to read between every line, just as you know others will read between yours in that moment. All the fuss over ink blots, margins, and polite phrases feels worth it because This is as close as you're allowed to get to speaking freely, pressed into paper, sealed in wax. The parlor smells faintly of beeswax, flower water, and cake destined to be sliced too thin to satisfy anyone. You step inside and feel your spine straighten an extra notch. This room is where reputations lounge on sofas, whisper in corners, and occasionally swoon on cue. The furniture looks comfortable, but you know better. Everything here has rules, even the cushions. You're invited to sit. Simple, until you notice there are about 8 possible places to choose from. Nearest the hostess, 2 forward. The far corner might look sulky. Right in the middle of the main sofa, courageous but risky, especially if you haven't mastered the art of sharing space without taking up too much of it. You choose a chair that faces the room but not the entire world, and lower yourself with the care usually reserved for handling explosives. Posture is never optional. You sit with your back straight, shoulders relaxed but never slumping against the chair back in an obvious way. Your feet rest side by side, ankles gently closed, never sticking out at angles that suggest you've forgotten you have legs. Hands rest in your lap or lightly on the chair arm. You do not cross your legs at the knee in mixed company. That maneuver belongs firmly in the category of shocking. Crossing at the ankle is the furthest you may go, without causing someone to drop their embroidery in horror. Widely accepted truth of your era is that the parlor or drawing rooms as the main stage for respectable socializing, especially for women. It's where callers are received, music is shared, engagements begin, and every flick of a fan or lift of an eyebrow carries hidden meaning. Etiquette books devote entire chapters to proper behavior, here treating the room as both reception, hall, and moral showcase. Historians still argue whether these manuals describe how average people truly live, or whether they present an idealized fantasy, followed only by the most anxious and well-off. Households, the sofa in particular, has its own politics. You do not flop. You do not sprawl. You certainly do not lean so close to anyone that your shoulders touch, unless you're close relatives or very old friends. The safe arrangement is a small, polite gap between you and whoever shares the cushion. Enough space for at least a ghost of a chaperone to sit. If the sofa has an elegant curved back, you're expected to echo that curve slightly in your posture. Graceful and contained, the whole thing feels like sharing a bench, while pretending neither of you actually needs the furniture. Nearby, you spot that legendary object of Victorian interior design, the fainting couch. It sits slightly apart from the other seating, one end raised like an invitation's, suggesting that at any moment someone might collapse onto it with poetic elegance. Officially, it exists for reasons of health and convenience. Tight corsets, heavy clothing, warm rooms, emotional news all provide plausible excuses for brief, dignified collapses. Unofficially, everyone knows it also functions as a small stage and upholstered escape hatch from awkward conversations. You keep smelling salts tucked somewhere, discreet perhaps in a tiny bottle hidden in your reticule. The sharp scent, swoon, a quirky detail some women love. These bottles can be surprisingly pretty, made of colored glass or decorated metal, turning a practical item into a fashionable accessory. It's hard to look truly tragic when your revival comes from a bottle that glitters like a jewel. You've watched friends practice there, swoons in private, trying to land in a way that's limp and poetic, but doesn't accidentally knock over a side table. Not every feint is entirely sincere. Sometimes, when parlor conversation turns unbearably tense or embarrassing, a sudden pallor and graceful collapse offer a perfect exit. One young woman you know supposedly crumpled onto a chaise the moment her aunt began publicly interrogating her about her friendship with a certain gentleman. Conveniently, the room erupted in concern. The topic was dropped. She recovered just in time for tea. Whether the feint was prompted by tight lacing, genuine nerves, or pure strategy remains a secret between her and her corset. Historians still debate whether frequent fainting was largely medical or partly a learned social habit encouraged by clothing and expectation. The length of your visit is another carefully timed performance. You do not linger indefinitely, turning the parlor into your personal nest. A respectable call might last 20 minutes to an hour, depending on closeness. Too short, and you seem cold. Too long, and you seem clingy. There's no obvious clock in your line of sight, but you develop a sense of how many topics feel natural before you should gracefully prepare to leave. You watch for subtle cues from your hostess. The way she shifts in her seat, glances at the window, or lets conversation thin. She never says, "Please go now." You're expected to sense it. Where you sit matters almost as much as how younger, unmarried women often gravitate toward spots near windows, pianos, or work tables where embroidery lies ready for display. Older married women frequently claim the commanding chairs near the fireplace or central sofa. Gentlemen, when present, may hover near mantels or stand behind chairs, hands resting lightly on the back. If one chooses to sit beside you, the distance of that placement is instantly measured by every eye in the room. Too close and brows rise. A perfectly respectable distance and eyes still gleam with interest. People pretend to read, sew, or listen to music, but everyone is also running quiet social calculations in the background. Even your gestures with small objects are watched. If you hold a book, you don't slump over it. You sit upright, the volume balanced lightly, pages turned with care. If you take up needlework, your hands move steadily, but unhurriedly stitches neat. Too much concentration looks unsociable. Too little makes it obvious the embroidery is just a prop. You chat and observe all at once, your mind divided into 3 calm streams, while your heartbeat occasionally sprints ahead at certain names or comments. Sometimes the parlor hosts music evenings. A piano stands against the wall, lid propped open, candles arranged to illuminate the keys. Someone suggests you might play, and etiquette says your refusal should be modest, but not absolute. After a token protest, you rise, arrange your skirts on the music stool, and place your fingers on the keys. Your choice of piece is important. Too simple, and you seem untrained. Too flashy, and you appear vain. Something lyrical, tidy, and gently expressive is safest. Applause must be modest, but you can hear pride and judgment woven into every polite clap. The door matters as much as the sofa. You do not burst in unannounced. A maid opens it, announces your name clearly, and only then do you step through. When you leave, you do so with similar ceremony, standing, thanking the hostess, offering a small curtsy or polite inclination of the head. You do not rush. You do not hover in the doorway for a final chat that drags on. A clean exit is part of the performance. By the time you step back into the hallway, your muscles ache slightly from holding perfect posture. Your smile feels carefully exercised, and your brain buzzes pleasantly from an hour of conversation, observation, and silent calculation. You've navigated chairs with invisible borders, sofas with implied meanings, and a fainting couch that thankfully didn't require your full body for a room full of cushions and curtains. The parlor demands a surprising amount of strength. You wake to a morning that feels polished as though the whole world has been dusted and rearranged. Just for this one event, the house hums before breakfast. Servants hurry past, arms full of flowers and folded linen. Somewhere downstairs, a spoon clatters to the floor and a hushed apology follows. Today is a wedding day, and you know everything anyone does will be remembered forever by at least 3 aunts, if you are the bride. Your room is suddenly crowded with fabric, attendants, and whispered instructions. If you are a guest, your own wardrobe still feels like a test. Weddings in your world are not just about love. They are about performance, reputation, and a very precise reading of the fashion script. Widely known fact is that white wedding dresses become dramatically fashionable in the 19th century after Queen Victoria wears white silk and lace for her marriage in 1840. Before that, brides in many places simply wore their best dress in any respectable color. After the royal example, white becomes the symbol of purity and elegant tastes, especially for those who can afford a gown they'll likely never wear again. You stand before the mirror, laces tightened, skirts arranged, and check the color you've chosen. If you are the bride in a wealthy family, white or ivory is the safest choice, paired with lace, ribbons, and perhaps a wreath of orange blossoms in your hair. Those blossoms carry their own coded meaning, whispering of fertility, good fortune, and new beginnings. If you are not rich enough for whiter, if your family is more practical, you might wear a gown in pale blue, soft gray, or even deep burgundy, so long as it's neat, modest, and clearly your best. Every stitch, every fold, every accessory has been chosen not just for beauty, but for what it says about your family, your future, and your place in the world. And as you step into the light of this carefully staged morning, you know this is not just a wedding. It is your most public performance, yet everyone is watching. Blue, soft, gray, or another color you intend to rework for future use. Historians still debate whether white truly dominated weddings across all levels of society, or whether it was largely an upper-class obsession, amplified by fashion magazines and idealized illustrations. Guests face their own chromatic puzzle. Arriving at someone else's wedding in pure white is nearly a mortal social sin, as though you're trying to visually compete with the bride at the same time. Black suggests mourning and is usually avoided unless you carry a very serious reason and, metaphorically, a letter of absolution from your own conscience. Bright scarlet, far too bold for many circles, so you choose something in the safe middle ground, elegant, but not The rule is simple: you are meant to look pretty, not pivotal. The ceremony usually takes place in a church or chapel, and that space carries its own quiet code. You step inside, dipping your head slightly, gloved hands folded. Guests are seated according to their connection to the bride or groom family in designated pews, close friends nearby, more distant acquaintances toward the back. You do not jostle for a better view. You go where an usher or a watchful and gently directs you. The air smells of beeswax, fresh flowers, and nervous anticipation. Organ music swells. You feel your own heart thud in time with it, heaven, if you're only here as a witness. The bride enters on her father's arm, or another male guardian if her father is absent. All eyes turn as one, a collective tilt that makes her dress and veil feel even heavier. Her veil may be short or long. Sometimes it covers her face, sometimes it frames it like a halo. The lifting of it at the right moment. Theatrical, a tiny curtain rising on the next chapter of her life. A quirky superstition holds that it's bad luck for the groom to see the bride in her wedding attire before the ceremony. So all this drama is carefully staged for maximum impact and minimum misfortune. Vows are spoken in steady, hopefully clear voices. Depending on the era and denomination, the bride may be asked to promise to obey, cherish, or serve, while the groom pledges to protect and provide. Some accept these words as natural. Others swallow hard and repeat phrases they don't fully believe because tradition and expectation press heavily on their shoulders. If rings are exchanged, the gesture marks a visible transformation. A bare hand becomes circled in gold. Everyone present is silently reminded that this pair is now officially bound by law, by custom, and by the watchful eyes of society. After the ceremony, you spill out into the daylight with the rest of the crowd. Blinking in the brightness, there may be confetti paper, rice, grain, or flower petals at the couple as they emerge. These symbolic missiles represent prosperity and fertility, though they occasionally find their way straight down someone's collar. Guests cluster around, offering congratulations, careful not to hug too tightly or smudge anyone's carefully arranged finery. You deliver your best wishes in tidy phrases, striving to sound genuinely warm without slipping into overt sentimentality in public. Back at the house or a hired venue, the wedding breakfast awaits. Despite its name, it's often a substantial midday meal, complete with courses, toasts, and meticulously arranged seating. Once again, you find your name on a card placed at a table with people you're meant to harmonize with. Loud, tipsy speeches are frowned upon in respectable circles. Instead, toasts tend to be earnest, slightly flowery, filled with wishes for happiness, many children, and stable finances. You raise your glass when prompted, sip politely, and silently hope no one expects you to improvise something emotional before a roomful of expectant faces. The cake is its own monument, a tall, iced creation, sometimes with multiple tiers, crowned with flowers or decorative figures. Cutting it becomes a ceremonial moment. The bride and groom place their hands together on the knife, slicing into the dense sweetness. As everyone watches, a quirky custom claims that unmarried girls who Sleep with a piece of wedding cake beneath their pillow will dream of their future husband. This leads to curious scenes, later careful slices, vanishing into handkerchiefs and reticules, destined for somewhat crumb-filled dreams. Gifts are not merely given, they are displayed. Tables hold silverware, china, linens, and small ornaments, all unwrapped and arranged so guests can admire them. There's a subtle competition in generosity and taste. A well-chosen, handsome object suggests affection and means. A cheap or inappropriate gift may be remembered years later when someone breaks out the tea set and mutters, "Ah yes, that dreadful sugar bowl from cousin so-and-so." Thank you letters will be written later, a fresh round of etiquette in ink. But for now, the gifts sit quietly, proof that this union has been endorsed in practical form throughout the day. You're mindful of how often you speak to the groom. Etiquette dictates that you greet him, offer warm congratulations once, and then do not monopolize his time, especially if you're a young, unmarried woman. Hovering near him can appear forward at best, predatory at worst, particularly under the hawk-like gaze of older relatives. You distribute your attention evenly between the couple, their families, and other guests, circulating just enough to seem sociable without appearing restless. Eventually comes the moment of departure. If the newlyweds are leaving immediately, they change into traveling clothes, the bride shedding her heavy gown for something more practical, yet still elegant. Guests gather to wave them off, perhaps with shouts of good wishes. There may be a decorated carriage, or later in the century, even a train awaiting them. You stand among the crowd, waving and smiling, feeling the gentle tug between sweetness and spectacle. A life is changing before you, and the scene is choreographed down to the last curtsy as the carriage door closes and the wheels begin to turn. The remaining guests drift back inside already, discussing the dress, the flowers, the food, the speeches, the way the groom looked at the bride, the way the bride looked at the floor. Historians still argue whether weddings like this represent genuine personal joy wrapped in lace, or primarily a public contract between families, polished for display from your place among the fading music and empty plates. It feels like both love and etiquette are so tightly stitched together that it's hard to see the seam. The wardrobe door opens and, instead of color, you're met with a wall of shadow. Black fabric hangs in solemn rows, matte and heavy, swallowing the light. You run your fingers along the stiff, scratchy surface of crepe, that special misery cloth, seemingly designed not only to look sorrowful, but to make you feel it in your very skin. Today, you are not simply sad. You are about to become officially, publicly sad, the way society expects you to be. Mourning has a timetable. It's not enough to grieve. You must schedule your grief correctly. For a widow, the rules are especially exacting. A widely accepted norm in respectable circles is that a widow should spend about 2 years in mourning for her husband, with the first year designated as deep mourning. During that time, your world contracts. You wear only dull black in fabrics that refuse to shine. No gleaming silk, no playful trimmings. Even your bonnet gains a heavy crepe veil, which can be drawn down like a portable curtain of solitude. Putting on this outfit feels like donning a uniform. The bodice is plain, the skirt unadorned, for the strange, crimped texture of mourning fabric, notoriously difficult to care for. It catches dust, frays easily, and sheds tiny fibers like a depressed snowstorm. You look in the mirror and see someone meticulously designed not to distract or attract. Even your jewelry must pass inspection. Jet fossilized wood, polished to a soft black luster, is acceptable, especially carved into brooches or beads. Anything too sparkly looks suspiciously joyful. Your social life shrinks. In deep mourning, you do not attend balls, theaters, or lively parties. You avoid large dinners and any gathering where laughter might rise too freely. Visits become quieter, briefer, and often limited to close friends or family. People act as though the slightest sign of enjoyment during this phase would be a betrayal. You might still smile, of course, but probably not, while holding a glass of champagne beneath a glittering chandelier. Even your calling cards change, printed with black borders that silently announce your status to anyone who handles your mail. After enough months pass according to whichever etiquette manual your family respects, your mourning may soften. Half mourning allows gray, lilac, mauve, and soft white to slowly seep back into your wardrobe. It's as if the world is being gently repainted. You might trim your black dresses with pale ribbon or wear gowns that are mostly gray with touches of black. This gradual shift signals to others that your grief is evolving. You are still respectful, but permitted to take one small step back toward ordinary life. Historians still debate whether most families truly observed these phases in detail, whether they adjusted the lengths and colors based on personal feeling, budget, or how deeply a particular relative meant to them. Of course, all of this costs money. Proper mourning fabric, new dresses, special veils, black-edged stationery, even jet jewelry odd up. There's a bittersweet absurdity in not being able to afford full mourning for a beloved cousin, while feeling obligated to make a visible effort for a wealthier, more distant relation, whose opinion still looms in family memory. Some quietly reuse older black clothes or dye existing garments, hoping the color turns out evenly enough that no one notices the thrift. Then there are the mementos of the dead that you actually wear. Hair jewelry becomes surprisingly popular. Locks from a deceased loved one are woven into intricate bracelets, brooches, watch chains, and rings. It sounds macabre at first, but the pieces can be quietly beautiful. Tiny braids and curls sealed under glass, a quirky detail of the trade. Some jewelers, facing high demand, use hair from anonymous donors when customers don't supply enough, meaning a few sentimental mourning brooches likely contain strands from total strangers. That's a level of intimacy no one expects. Photography joins the ritual. Two families commission portraits of the deceased, sometimes posed to appear peacefully asleep. Images of the living in mourning dress also become common. You sit for a photograph in full black, gaze solemn, and send copies to relatives as visual proof of your beautiful grief. The stiff pose, the dark clothes, and the long exposure times make everyone look profoundly serious, even if the sitter was really just hoping the photographer wouldn't drop another glass plate. Children have their own scaled-down mourning rules. A black ribbon here, a dark armband there, simpler clothes in sober shades. It's understood that forcing heavy veils and scratchy crepe on young children is excessive, though some families try anyway. You watch younger cousins fidget in their somber outfits, clearly more distressed by stiff collars than by symbolism, and feel that odd blend of sadness and quiet amusement woven into this entire system. Not all grief fits the official script. Some people cry openly, others retreat into silence. Some throw themselves into work until their thoughts catch up with them in the stillness of night. Yet the outward performance of mourning often looks the same, no matter what the heart is doing beneath the fabric. Queen Victoria famously wears black for decades after Prince Albert's death, turning permanent widowhood into part of her public identity. Her example encourages elaborate, prolonged mourning among those who see her as the model of propriety. It's hard to say how many truly feel as deeply as she doesn't, how many simply feel obliged to match the tone she sets. You sometimes wonder, does wearing grief make it heavier or easier to carry? On one hand, the black clothes constantly remind you of the loss, catching your eye in mirrors and shop windows. On the other, the rules give you something to do when nothing else makes sense. Choosing the right fabric, arranging your veil, deciding when to shift from deep to half mourning. It all provides a schedule for emotions that otherwise feel formless. Some find comfort in this structure. Others chafe against it, longing to laugh again without waiting for the calendar to grant permission. Cruel comparisons abound. People whisper that someone didn't mourn long enough, that their dresses looked too fashionable for fresh sorrow. Others complain if a widow keeps her weeds too long, suggesting she clings to sadness for dramatic effect or to avoid social obligations. It's as if there's a narrow corridor of acceptable feeling, and any step to either side invites commentary. You learn quickly that public tears are safer than public jokes, that a black bonnet shields you from both sunlight and certain kinds of judgment. As time passes and color slowly returns to your wardrobe, you don't suddenly stop missing anyone. That part doesn't obey etiquette. The rules may say a year is enough for a parent, 2 for a spouse, 6 months for a grandparent, but your memories refuse to follow the chart. You might find yourself reaching for a black ribbon long after everyone else has moved on, or laughing freely while still technically in the prescribed phase of mourning. Your heart has its own calendar, one that never quite matches the printed ones. When you finally hang up the last of the crepe, folding it away with its rough texture and rustling sigh, you feel lighter in body, more complicated in mind. You've done what was expected. You've worn grief like a uniform, written it into your clothes, your schedule, your very silhouette. Now the world expects you to be ready for more color, more outings, more smiles. You take a breath, touch the fabric one last time, step out into the day, carrying your loss inside instead of pinned visibly to your sleeves. You stand in the front hall, staring at your hat as if it holds all the answers. It does not. It only knows one thing: you are going out tanned. You are not walking. Today involves wheels, strangers, and that special kind of social tension that only arises when you're trapped in a moving box, pretending other people don't exist. Time to brave the world of carriages and trains with your dignity, your gloves, and hopefully your lunch intact. First, the carriage. Your family coach waits outside, catching a pale gleam in the Sunday light. Climbing in is not a scramble, it's a choreographed move. You allow the footman to open the door and offer his hand. You place yours in his lightly not, clinging as if he's rescuing you from a river, one foot on the step. Then the other skirts lifted just enough to clear the doorway without revealing anything that would make your grandmother faint. You lower yourself onto the seat with care, arranging your fabric so it doesn't billow up and smother you inside. You sit facing forward, if possible, especially if you hold the higher rank. Lesser guests may sit with their backs to the horses. Knees stay reasonably parallel, never sprawling into the shared space. If you share the seat with someone, your skirts create a soft boundary. You don't shove them aside with your bustle, but you also don't squash yourself into the corner like a guilty cushion. Modest comfort is the goal. Conversation depends on your company with family. You can relax slightly, though not so much that you forget. The coachman hears more than anyone admits through that small front window with acquaintances. You speak lightly about the route, the weather, your destination. You do not interrogate them about finances, love lives, or hat preferences. If a gentleman sits across from you, his knees must respect your space, and his eyes should linger more on the passing scenery than on your face. Ideally, that's how it works. Reality is hit or miss. Stepping out is the same dance in reverse. You wait for the servant to open the door. You do not leap down like an acrobat. You take the offered hand, descend with controlled, small motions, and land with your feet together, never stumbling across the pavement. If your hat shifts, you pretend that was the look you intended. Adjusting it is allowed, but no dramatic wrestling with ribbons in public. Then one day, you trade horses for steam. The railway station looms iron and glass, humming with a new, slightly unnerving energy. People hurry in all directions. Porters weave through the crowd with stacks of luggage, capable of flattening an unwary ant. You hold your reticule closer and follow your companion toward the ticket office, where destinations march across a board in neat letters. Rail travel becomes central to 19th century life. Lines spread across countries, linking towns once isolated by days of coach travel. Timetables appear in newspapers, and middle-class families embrace the chance to visit seaside resorts, distant relatives, or cities that once existed only in dreams. By the later Victorian decades, railways in Britain and much of Europe connect most major towns, turning journeys that once took days into mere hours. Speed and convenience arrive hand in hand with a fresh set of etiquette dilemmas. You or your escort buy a ticket and head to the correct platform. Class matters, even in motion. First-class carriages are cushioned, decorated, and expensive. Second and third are plainer, sometimes with wooden benches that turn long trips into tests of spinal endurance. Respectable women are usually guided toward the higher classes, partly for comfort, partly for perceived safety. The train roars in with a hiss and clank that some still find unnerving. Early fears claimed the human body couldn't withstand such speeds that hearts would fail, brains would rattle loose, or morals would dissolve in the chaos. Historians still debate whether these fears were widespread or mostly the domain of anxious doctors and moralists. You step forward anyways, lifted from the grime, accept a helping hand into the waiting compartment. Compartments are their own tiny universes in many trains of your era. There's no central corridor. Each compartment opens directly onto the platform, with two long benches facing each other and a door on either side. Once the train departs, you're effectively sealed in until the next stop. Makes your choice of seatmates a matter of serious concern. Ladies often prefer to sit together, especially when traveling without a male relative. In some countries, ladies-only carriages exist, meant to reassure families that their daughters won't be trapped with questionable strangers. You take your place on the bench, again avoiding excessive contact. If the compartment isn't full, you leave a slight gap between yourself and any unknown man. Luggage goes overhead or under the seat, neatly stacked. You do not explode into the space with bags, shawls, parcels, and sandwiches flying. Once settled, the dance of eye contact begins. You're expected to be polite, but not chatty. A small nod when someone enters is acceptable. Launching into your life story is not. If a fellow passenger attempts conversation, you answer briefly but pleasantly unless your companion signals disapproval with a cough sharp enough to slice glass. You do not share personal details. You do not accept food or drink from strangers. And you certainly do not allow anyone to sit uncomfortably close without shifting away as much as the compartment allows. Reading is a safe refuge. You can open a book or newspaper, effectively hiding behind the printed page, staring out the window. Also work so long as you don't press your nose to the glass like a bored child. Quirky rules govern train behavior. Warnings advise against leaning out of windows, sticking limbs into rushing air, or littering the tracks. Some carriages display printed notices, politely begging passengers not to smoke in others' faces or spit on the floor. In certain places, early signs even discourage amorous couples from overly affectionate behavior mid-journey. The idea of a passionate embrace in a tiny compartment, while others pretend to be invisible, is enough to make half the moralists in your world faint into their newspapers. Accidents remain a grim undercurrent. News reports of collisions and derailments appear from time to time, filled with dramatic prose and moral lessons. Some develop railway spine, a supposed condition of nervous exhaustion linked to the jolts of train travel. Others dismiss it as fashionable hypochondria. You simply know that when the train lurches, you grab the strap or seat, e.g., and hope your hat pins are doing their job. By the time you reach your stop, you're oddly tired from doing so little. Your body has stayed still, but your mind has been quietly busy managing glances, posture, and the delicate art of existing politely in a metal box with strangers. As the train slows, you gather your things without flapping. You wait for the door to be opened if a porter is available and step down carefully. You do not shove. You let older passengers and those nearest the door go first, so long as they're not dithering for 10 minutes. Carriages and trains both claim to make life easier in some ways. They absolutely do. You can move farther and faster than your grandmother ever dreamed. Yet every mile of that movement is wrapped in guidelines, silent judgments, and unwritten rules about where you sit, whom you speak to, and how you look while doing it. You end the day with dust on your hem, a slight ache between your shoulder blades, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've traveled without scandal, incident, or accidentally locking eyes with the wrong person for more than 3 seconds. You wake one morning and decide to notice what you're not supposed to notice. Not your dress, not your hair, not even the biscuits that mysteriously appear. Just when your mood needs them, you decide to pay attention to the hands that make all of it happen. Because in your world, being a proper lady means pretending the house runs on grace and sunshine when, in truth, you live inside a meticulously organized human machine. You begin with the bells. Along the back corridor, mounted on the wall, is a row of small brass bells on springs, each labeled in neat letters: drawing room, morning room, dining room, best bedroom, and so on. When someone pulls a cord in a room upstairs, the corresponding bell downstairs gives a sharp, impatient jingle. The system looks almost cheerful, like a row of metal flowers. In reality, it's the front door to every wish you've ever had. Tea, hot water, extra pillows, missing gloves, all begin with that tiny vibration. You're allowed to pull those cords. That's part of your role. The trick is knowing how often and how hard. Etiquette says a gentle tug is enough. Only the impatient and vulgar yank repeatedly, as if summoning ghosts. You learn to wait a reasonable time before ringing again if no one appears. You're expected to trust that the staff are busy, not lazy, especially when the house is full and every bell seems to be chiming at once. In many comfortable Victorian households, there's a strict hierarchy among servants. At the top stands the butler, overseeing wine, silver, and male staff. The housekeeper rules the female servants, linens, and household stores. Below them, footmen, maids of various ranks, cooks, scullery maids, kitchen maids, nursemaids, coachmen, grooms. It's like a small company with job titles and clear reporting lines. A mainstream historical fact: in large, upper-class homes, it's entirely normal to employ 10, 20, or more servants, each with defined duties and an internal pecking order, nearly as strict as the family's own. Your official job is to float past it, Ellen, make it look effortless. You're meant to appear gracious, never flustered, never wondering where the clean sheets come from. You ask for what you need. Please and thank you attached, and the hallway fills with movement to make it happen. Etiquette guides remind you that good breeding shows in how you treat those below you. Harshness looks coarse. Excessive familiarity looks weak. You must sit perfectly in the middle, firm, fair, and always a little above. You start the day by ringing for your maid. When she appears, she waits just inside, the door, hands folded, eyes lowered, but not so far that she trips over the rug. You do not bark orders. You say things like, "I shall need the blue dress brushed," or "Would you be so kind as to fetch fresh water?" Your tone matters. Too sharp, and you look like a tyrant. Too soft, and relatives will whisper that you let the staff walk all over you. Mixing courtesy with expectation is an art, like making meringue without a recipe. Behind the scenes, the rhythm is different. In the servants' hall, people talk frankly. Footmen joke about guests who ring twice in the time it takes to cross a room. Maids imitate their employers' voices with unsettling accuracy. A quirky detail: some butlers and housekeepers keep private notebooks listing which visitors tip well at Christmas, who leaves their room in chaos, and who always sends compliments to the kitchen. Good behavior earns you extra patience later. When you misplace your hat pin for the third time that week, you're not supposed to know any of this. Of course, but little hints slip through. You notice which maid seems amused when you apologize for ringing late at night, which footman hurries to open the door before a certain cousin can ring his bell 3 times in one breath. Everyone in the house is acting, you on the stage, they in the wings. The set looks combat. Backstage is a scramble of trays, mops, and whispered complaints. Meals offer another lesson in servant etiquette. When the parlor maid brings in a tray, you do not shout instructions across the room. You catch her eye, speak quietly, and let her step forward before making specific requests. You do not thank every person for every movement that would leave you talking endlessly, but you offer clear, occasional gratitude. A simple thank you, delivered with sincerities, often enough to be remembered. Mary Herond, that was an excellent dinner. Please convey my compliments to cook. Habit makes it sound natural. Tipping is its own delicate negotiation. At Christmas or New Year, guests often give small sums or modest gifts to the servants who attended them, a custom sometimes called a Christmas box. Give too little, and you seem miserly. Give too much, and you unsettle the very order you're meant to uphold. There are whispered guidelines, unwritten but widely known. Who drove you once? Historians still debate whether most middle-class families followed these rituals precisely, or whether many improvised based on temperament, budget, and circumstance, with servants quietly absorbing the awkwardness of any misstep. Invisible boundaries thread through the house itself. Certain stairs are for servants, narrow, steep, tucked away so they can move swiftly between floors without being seen. Certain doors are rarely used by the family, meant almost exclusively for staff. You may occasionally feel tempted to try the back staircase, curious about the world behind your own. If you do, you instantly feel out of place. Your fine shoes on bare boards, your skirts brushing walls that smell of soap and stewed onions instead of perfume. Up front, the house presents carpets, wallpaper, and gleaming silver. Behind, the tools that keep it all running lie in plain sight. Buckets, brooms, spare candles, half-mended linens. You quickly learn that gossip flows in every direction. Servants hear a great deal and share it among themselves. Families sometimes forget how clearly voices carry through floorboards and thin doors. You also learn that some employers actually fear their staff, worried about what might be repeated in the neighborhood. A servant with a good memory and a gift for storytelling wields quiet power. Etiquette manuals urge you to avoid quarrels and scandalous scenes at home, not just for dignity's sake, but to control the narrative in the kitchen. Yet, for all the hierarchy, real relationships take root. A lady might rely on her maid almost like a confidant, confiding small anxieties while pins and laces are adjusted. A nursemaid may grow deeply attached to the children in her care, closer to them in daily life than some of their own relatives. In moments of illness or crisis, it's often the servants who stay up through the night with broths, clean sheets, and cool cloths pressed to fevered brows. Your gratitude may never appear in ledgers or letters, but it can be strong and deeply sincere. You also see how much pretending is required. Guests remark on how smoothly the dinner went, how charming the drawing room looked as if it all appeared by magic. You politely agree, as though you yourself had polished the silver with nothing but good intentions. The truth is that a small army rose before dawn, hauling coal, scrubbing floors, arranging flowers, ironing napkins, testing every bell. Their labor is designed to be invisible. Your role is to behave as though this invisible work is your natural environment, acquiring no effort to sustain. Sometimes you catch yourself wondering what life would be like on the other side of the bells. Less lace, more blisters, less sitting, more running up and down stairs. Different worries, different kinds of pride. You know your comfort rests on their toil. Society teaches you to tuck that knowledge away somewhere discreet, behind polite discussions of proper treatment and decent wages. The performance only works if everyone pretends the curtains are glued to the wall. At the end of the day, you blow out your candle or turn down the lamp, slip between clean sheets that appeared without your seeing them changed, and listen to the faint creaks of movement in distant corridors. Someone is banking the fires, locking the doors, folding the last cloths in the kitchen. You close your eyes and let sleep pull you under while the quiet machinery of the household winds down around you. Already preparing to begin again at the first bell of morning, you sit by the window in a neat little cage of sleeves and buttons, feeling oddly proud that you've survived another day without fainting, combusting, or scandalizing the neighbors with an exposed elbow. Apparently, that's not enough. According to the experts of your time, you must also be healthier, purer, stronger, and more robust, all while wrapped in enough fabric to upholster a small sofa. Welcome to the world of Victorian health advice, where modesty and medical theory hold hands and sprint in opposite directions. Your day begins with fresh air. To be precise, though, the definition is flexible. You open a window just a crack, enough to let in a thread of breeze, but not so much that the full reality of city smells, coal, smoke, horse dung, damp wool invades your sanctuary. Health reformers insist stale indoor air weakens body and mind. Moralists warn that open windows and low necklines invite chills and unwanted male attention. You compromise by pulling your shawl tighter and pretending you're breathing alpine mist, not the mingled breath of a metropolis. There's a great deal of talk about circulation. You're encouraged to walk, take gentle exercise, wave your arms, swing your shoulders, all in the name of moving your blood. The problem: you must do it all with dignity. No energetic flailing, no sprinting down the lane. You're meant to glide briskly, a phrase that sounds like a contradiction until you're actually doing it, a widely accepted fact. Many Victorian doctors begin recommending moderate, daily exercises, especially walking, as a way to stave off nervous ailments and aid digestion. You cling to that official approval while carefully avoiding puddles and the gaze of staring neighbors. Then comes the matter of undergarments. On one hand, tight lacing and heavy skirts are accused of compressing lungs, squashing stomachs, and turning you into a decorative but fragile object. On the other, modesty demands you be thoroughly covered in multiple layers at nearly all times. Medical advice clashes with moral panic. Some health manuals suggest looser stays, lighter fabrics, fewer petticoats. Critics mutter that such comfort will lead directly to moral collapse. You privately suspect most of them have never tried climbing 3 flights of stairs in a wool dress and full winter underthings. Bathing sits at the center of several storms. Everyone agrees cleanliness is virtuous in theory. In practice, full body baths are awkward to arrange, especially in homes without plumbed bathrooms. You might have a hip bath brought to your room, filled with hot water you didn't have to carry. Modesty requires locked doors, curtained windows, and a system of screens if a maid assists. Soap is praised as civilized, yet some still worry that too much washing weakens the body or stirs inappropriate self-awareness. Historians still debate whether most Victorians maintained regular full baths, relied on basin washes and occasional immersions as special efforts. Water also arrives as therapy. Mineral springs, hydrotherapy establishments, and seaside resorts all advertise miraculous powers. You might be sent to a spa town to drink water that smells of old coins or rotten eggs because someone claims it cures everything from liver trouble to melancholy. At hydropathic institutions, you're wrapped in cold, wet sheets, plunged into icy baths, or sprayed with jets of water in patterns that sound more like punishment than relaxation. There's a quirky enthusiasm for dousing people at odd hours in the name of health, as though surprise cold water were a direct path to enlightenment. The seaside becomes one of the grand prescriptions. Doctors recommend sea air and sea bathing for delicate constitutions, anxious minds, and children who look too pale for comfort. Entire families travel to resorts where bathing machines dot the shore, little wooden huts on wheels that roll into the surf so you can step directly into the water without revealing too much of yourself. You wear heavy woolen bathing costumes that cling in all the wrong places and weigh as much as a drenched bear. Modesty is preserved, not dignity, as you stumble through the surf like a slightly waterlogged armchair. At home, you encounter health gadgets that look like props from a very earnest circus. Spring-loaded chest expanders, rubber resistance bands, vibrating chairs, and mechanical massagers promising to shake illness right out of you. Advertisements praise tonics filled with mysterious ingredients, halfings of alcohol and compounds. Future scientists will frown at very hard. There are even corsets marketed as healthy, allegedly designed to support the spine and improve breathing. The idea of a health corset is quietly absurd, like a comfortable guillotine. You still consider loosening the laces a tiny bit when your aunt isn't looking. Digestion receives endless attention. You're warned against heavy puddings late at night, yet served enormous meals at formal dinners. Some writers recommend plain food, early hours, and chewing each bite thoroughly. Others swear by strange tonics before breakfast and forbid raw fruit entirely. You're told to eat enough to sustain your strength, but not so much that you lose your fashionable waist. The result: you spend a great deal of time wondering whether another biscuit will fortify your constitution or offend your dressmaker. Nerves become a fashionable affliction. Women who feel tired, anxious, or overwhelmed are diagnosed with nervous disorders, perhaps neurasthenia or hysteria. Treatments vary wildly. Rest cures confine patients to bed, ban reading, and prescribe endless milk and silence. Other regimes offer riding, fresh air, and deliberate distraction. Some doctors believe women are inherently delicate and must be shielded from stress. Others argue that boredom and too much indoor life are the real culprits. Historians still debate whether these diagnoses reflect genuine illness, social pressure, or a convenient label for those who didn't fit the mold. You mostly know this. Sometimes you're tired because you're doing too much while pretending to do nothing. Health constantly collides with modesty. You might be told to wear lighter clothing for your lungs, yet also warned to cover your chest against drafts and the male gaze. Loose exercise outfits begin appearing in magazines, women in bloomers, shorter skirts, blouses moving freely in private gardens or gymnasiums. Critics insist these outfits look unfeminine or dangerously modern. Admirers say they finally let women breathe. You study those illustrations with an expression that is officially skeptically and secretly longing. Outdoor fashion tries to blend wellness with decency. Sunlight is said to be good for uba-tanned skin, signals manual labor in many circles. So you carry a parasol, wear gloves, and perhaps a veil or wide-brimmed hat, effectively walking around in your own portable shade. Beach promenades fill with people carefully avoiding exposure while claiming to enjoy the sea. You picture some future age where people might actually lie in the sun on purpose and laugh quietly, because that sounds completely unhinged inside your own mind. You build a private health rulebook that edits the louder voices you accept. What makes sense? Fresh air when possible, walking when corsets permit, enough sleep to stop your eyelids from twitching politely at breakfast. You ignore the stranger suggestions, leeches, dubious tonics, electric belts promising to cure backache and heartbreak alike. If someone begins a sentence with, "My cousin's neighbor was cured of everything by," you've learned to nod while quietly resolving to do absolutely nothing about it. At night, you unhook, unpin, and unbutton your way out of the day. Layers come off, hair is brushed, skin is finally free of stiff collars and stays. You wash as much as privacy. Plumbing and energy allow feeling muscles relax that you hadn't realized were clenched. For a few quiet minutes, your body belongs entirely to you, not to fashion plates, medical handbooks, or nervous relatives. You breathe as deeply as your ribs will allow, and decide that perhaps the best health practice available is simply lying still, unobserved and unjudged, letting your thoughts drift as gently as steam from a forgotten teacup. Afternoon light drifts AC. For a moment, everything looks perfectly proper. Then you notice it. Tiny hairline fractures in the polite surface. A girl crossing the street a little too confidently. A widow wearing lilac ribbons sooner than etiquette books approve. A young wife answering her husband in a tone that says she has her own thoughts and no intention of misplacing them. It starts in small places. A book left out that you're not really supposed to read, perhaps a novel deemed too intense for gentle minds, or a pamphlet arguing that women should vote and own property. You pick it up anyway. The words feel warm in your hands. A widely known truth of your century. More and more women learn to read and write, and cheap printing floods homes with paper that quietly minds. There are women who look at their wardrobes and simply decide they are done fainting. Dress reform societies begin to appear politely, suggesting that, perhaps, breathing is more important than a wasp waist. Some pioneers try looser gowns, fewer petticoats, even bifurcated garments for sports in certain places. Brave souls ride bicycles in bloomers, a scandalous sight that sends some observers into fits. A quirky rumor claims cycling will permanently distort a woman's face, giving her a hard expression. You ride anyway in your imagination, wind in your hair, utterly indifferent to your hypothetical jawline. Education shifts. Universities and colleges open their doors to female students, first grudgingly, then more steadily. You hear of women studying medicine, law, science, literature, not as hobbies, but as vocations. Some attend lectures behind screens or in separate rows, so male students won't be distracted into collapse. Historians still debate whether these early opportunities transformed many lives quickly or mostly laid groundwork for a future yet to come. To you, reading about them feels like receiving secret letters from a world where your curiosity isn't a problem to be wrapped in lace. Work, too, begins to change shape. Middle-class ideals still decree a lady shouldn't toil for pay, but reality has other opinions. Teachers, writers, nurses, shopgirls, office, Clerksville, cities and towns. You might secretly send a story or poem to a magazine under a pen name. Heart racing when the post arrives. Some women take jobs after widowhood or financial hardships, stepping carefully into worlds of wages and timetables. Etiquette scrambles to keep up, inventing new rules for how a respectable woman may work without being mistaken for someone less protected. At social gatherings, rebellion often looks like conversation. You ask sharper questions, push gently against approved topics. You raise an eyebrow and offer a pointed example. A suffragist speaking in a public hall, a nurse on a battlefield, a factory worker handling machines that could flatten a careless hand. You do it lightly with a hint of humor, but the idea lands. Some women stop playing by the calling card rules entirely. They move to cities, lodge in ladies' boarding houses, visit friends without waiting months for formal introductions. They organize clubs and reading circles, raise money for charities and political causes, attend meetings crowded with both excitement and cigar smoke. Newspapers sometimes mock them, cartoons of severe women in spectacles, marching with banners. The ridicule is meant to sting. It also accidentally advertises their existence to anyone paying attention. Even marriage wobbles on its pedestal. Laws slowly change in some places. Wives can now own property, keep their earnings, seek legal separation from cruel husbands. The changes are far from complete, but the direction is different from what your grandmother knew. You hear of court cases where judges reluctantly admit a woman shouldn't be treated as furniture. The idea that a wife might leave a terrible marriage no longer belongs only to whispered novel plots in drawing rooms and at tea tables. Habits shift so gently that older relatives barely notice. At first, you answer when a man asks you a direct question in mixed company, no longer waiting for your father to speak for you. You politely decline a dance with someone who makes your skin crawl instead of obeying pressure to be agreeable at all costs. You compliment another woman without turning it into a competition. Your rebellion isn't fireworks, it's refusals that look like courtesy. Secret pleasures multiply. A locked drawer holds novels that speak of women's anger as well as their sweetness. A journal where you write exactly what you think of certain rules, certain cousins, certain days, quiet solidarity with a friend who admits she doesn't plan to marry not because no one asked, but because she prefers her own company. No etiquette book has instructions for that choice. You invent your own. Public voices grow louder. You read reports of marches, petitions, speeches in halls filled with women in sturdy boots and determined hats. A mainstream truth. Organized movements for women's suffrage and legal rights gain real momentum toward the end of the 19th century, with meetings that spill into streets. Some cheer. Others predict societal collapse in a flood of unpressed shirts and unbuttered toast. Historians still debate whether these movements drew mostly from certain classes or reached deeply into ordinary lives. The shouting in newspapers makes it sound like everyone is either terrified or thrilled. You are not always heroic. Some days, you comply with every rule because you're tired and just want a quiet evening with your sewing and a nice cup of tea. Some days, you say the expected thing because it's easier than arguing with an uncle who's never laced a corset yet has many opinions about them. Rule breaking is rarely a constant blaze. It's more often a series of sparks, some bright hall, waiting to see where they might catch in the mirror. You still look like a Victorian lady, corseted, gloved, hairpinned, skirts carefully arranged, yet there's something different in the way you meet your own gaze. You know more now about the invisible choices behind every visible rule. You know that some women are bending those rules. Some are snapping them outright, and some are simply living inside them while quietly refusing to let them define their whole selves. You straighten your shoulders, not because etiquette demands it, but because you choose to. You walk into the next room with the same smooth step you've practiced for years only now. It belongs a little more to you. The calling cards, the tea tables, the trains and parlors all become less like cages and more like stages where you decide, at least in part, how the scene will go. The rules haven't vanished, but the cracks are there, silver and bright, letting in just enough light to see a different shape for the future. The house grows quieter in your mind, now like a theater. After the last guests have gone home, chandeliers dim, skirts rustle only in memory. All the stiff, glittering rules that have paraded past you begin to soften at the edges. You're no longer walking cobbled streets or gliding through ballrooms. You're simply lying where you are, listening to the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Those impossible dresses, those careful bows, the clink of china, the scratch of pen on paper. They drift a little farther away with each slow exhale. The women who lived inside all that etiquette don't feel so distant anymore. They lounge at the edge of your thoughts, some perfectly proper, some quietly rebellious. All of them a little more human now that you've seen how much effort it took to seem effortless. You picture one loosening her corset in a dark bedroom, another slipping a forbidden book under her pillow, another laughing a fraction too loudly at a joke and deciding not to apologize. You let their small acts of bravery and mischief fold gently into your own sense of self-like. Extra blankets tucked around your shoulders. The past isn't pressing on you anymore. It's keeping you company. The rules fade, The soft details remain, a lamplight glow. The weight of a teacup in your hand, the feel of cool night air on your face as a carriage door closes. You let those images slow down, like snowflakes on their way to the ground, each one settling lightly, disappearing as soon as it touches the surface of your thoughts. Nothing to remember perfectly, nothing to analyze, just pictures that melt into calm. You've walked a long way through another time, and you don't need to hold any of it tightly. You can smile at the absurdities, feel a little tenderness for the people who tried so hard to be good, and then let the whole world of calling cards and corsets, dim like a lantern turned low, dot your room, your bed, your present body resting safe, steadily unwinding. Let your eyes grow heavy, let your breath stay slow and easy, and let sleep take its time wrapping around you like the softest, kindest kind of etiquette there has ever been.